the future of Greenland and Denmark decided solely by the people of Denmark. In Greenland, we know that. It's why we cooperate, as I said at the start, and I'll finish here, why we cooperate culturally, why we cooperate economically, and why we cooperate in security.
I don't have a lot to add. I totally agree with you. We are very close allies and friends. I would like to thank you for your work within the Coalition of the Willing, your support to European security. We work very closely together in the Baltic states as well, and you have been very clear in your statement when it comes to the respect of national sovereignty and the respect of our common values, the only values where you can build a global world society on. So I really appreciate your strong support. I think we are both very into securing the Arctic region, and together with other NATO allies we can secure the region. So hopefully everybody is willing to work together, and I think you are a very good friend, a very close ally to not only Denmark but Europe. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Andrew?
There we go.
Now, I would like to invite Charlie Angus, who is leading Midas Canada, to join the conversation. At the moment, Midas Canada is conducting a nationwide tour, and there is a good chance they may be coming to a city or town near you, if you are in Canada. So I encourage you to take a moment to check the tour schedule. I have been following this closely, and I publicly support Charlie Angus as a consequential leadership figure. A former federal MP, the head of Midas Canada, and a voice that is receiving growing attention in Canadian political life. If he is coming to your area, make the effort to attend and listen on directly to what he has to say. In this discussion, Charlie Angus speaks very candidly about how Canadians currently view Donald Trump. In his view, Trump is no longer simply a controversial politician, but has become part of what he describes as a form of global gangster fascism, an ideological axis that Trump and Vladimir Putin jointly represent. This is the first part of our conversation with Charlie Angus. By the way, if you are interested, consider subscribing to his channel on Midas Canada, as well as the Midas Touch YouTube channel, to help support their goal of reaching 6 million subscribers. But returning to the substance of the discussion, Charlie Angus is careful to emphasize that when he speaks about gangster fascism, he is not painting the entire Republican Party with the same brush. He draws a clear distinction between traditional Republicans and the mob-style, power-driven strain that Trump represents. In the second part of the discussion, Charlie Angus goes on to examine how Canada is positioning itself on the front lines in confronting and pushing back against this trend of political gangsterism at the international level. But first, let us begin with what he has to say about the concept of gangster fascism itself. Please watch the following clip.
Okay, let's talk about what Donald Trump has set out to do by invading Venezuela and kidnapping President Maduro and his wife. This has nothing to do with democracy. Trump has made it clear that the Democratic opposition he considers weak. He's not even going to consider letting them take control in their own country. It's about the oil, he said. This has nothing to do with drugs, obviously, even though drugs and drug threats were the original reason for him shooting people off boats and then seizing the oil tankers, because he just recently pardoned the ex-head of Honduras, Hernandez, who is charged and convicted of flooding the United States with cocaine. So what was the point? The point was to send a message. To send a message to Canada and to the rest of the world that what the United States is and has become is a gangster klepto state that will do what they want to do and shake down whoever they want to shake down. Gangster fascism. You know what he said at this press conference he gave was that American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. This was sending a message. And it's a clear message to Canada. He said, "We will secure our borders, we will stop the terrorists, we will defend our citizens against all threats, foreign and domestic. This operation should serve as a warning to anyone who would threaten American sovereignty." Well, clearly Venezuela wasn't threatening American sovereignty. Venezuela was doing its own thing when Donald Trump, again, launched attacks on the fishing boats and set up the illegal blockade and seized the ships. Donald Trump is telling us that the oil that he is interested in getting control of is somehow part of the sovereignty of America. What he said was this was the Don Roe doctrine, an update on the 19th century Manifest Destiny Monroe doctrine, but it has nothing to do with the 19th century Manifest Destiny. This is classic gangster shakedowns. Donald Trump is a gangster. We have to be really clear about that. It's something that the American media has tiptoed around and ignored time and time again. Donald Trump exists today because of the massive amount of dark Russian mob money that was laundered through his operations. It created this image of him as this wealthy tycoon. He has benefited from mafia money. He has benefited from criminal ties. That's who Donald Trump is. Donald Trump is a convicted sexual predator. We know this, and yet he was allowed to become president of the United States of America. So should we be surprised that MAGA, with its constant grift and constant threat and constant shakedown, is basically a criminal state run by a criminal? So that's the first part of what we talk about in criminal fascism. Ben Masilas from Midas Touch said that one of the reasons he started to work with me was that I was the first person publicly to identify the nature of modern MAGA as a gangster fascist state. I don't know if I was the first, but it was really important from the beginning of my work to try and make people understand what we were dealing with wasn't just a new manifestation of crazy Republican politics and right-wing chest beating, that it was something different. It was the gangster element, the kleptocracy, but also the rising level of authoritarianism, undermining the rule of law, threatening judges, going after independent media, the fascist element.
In this segment, Charlie Angus speaks directly with me about how Canada is positioning itself on the front lines in response to the risk of a more invasive escalation from the United States. He discusses a mindset that is increasingly taking hold across Canadian society, one in which people no longer view threats from Washington as mere political posturing or rhetorical excess, but as developments that must be taken seriously and prepared for. This conversation is not sensationalist. It reflects a sober and pragmatic assessment. Canada understands its geography, understands its historical dependencies, and understands that in the current environment, it can no longer rely solely on goodwill or outdated assumptions about allied relations. Angus explains why many Canadians believe the country must be more proactive, more explicit, and more resolute in defending its sovereignty and national interests. Now, I invite you to watch the following clip to hear directly what Charlie Angus has to say about where Canada stands in today's geopolitical landscape.
Once you put the gangster fascist pieces together, you now know the level of threat that's on our border. And long before Donald Trump even knew where Venezuela was, he was setting a narrative of threat against Canada. So Donald Trump talks about securing the borders and stopping the terrorists and going after the drug kings. Well, the first thing he said about Canada was that we were somehow this fentanyl center killing thousands of Americans. He described fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. Well, you know the coded language of weapons of mass destruction, giving a U.S. regime the ability to go in and invade in another country. And Prime Minister Trudeau tried and tried again to reassure the Americans, to use facts, to show that our border was not flooding the Americans with fentanyl, but it didn't matter. It was about establishing a narrative. Kash Patel of the FBI then ramped it up. He started to talk about needing to protect the American border from the Canadian terrorist threat. He talked about hundreds of terrorists coming across the border. It was ridiculous. We know that. But did you hear the New York Times and the Washington Post and the CNN and the blah blahs on the evening talk show saying, what the heck is he talking about, this threat from Canada? Donald Trump was establishing a narrative of threat. And then that threat was elevated again by Kristi Noem, who started to talk about the threat of the northern border, that's us, bringing criminal gangs, El Salvadorian gangs across the border to terrorize poor American citizens. We knew that was ridiculous. But again, the narrative of threat, and now Donald Trump is telling the world that he can go wherever he wants, he can take whatever he feels he wants to take from any country under the pretext of threat. A threat that in Venezuela did not exist, a threat that in Canada does not exist. This is the nature of gangster fascism. But I talked about the crack that's beginning to appear. And I want to go into that a bit more, because the crack is appearing in the bombast, the arrogance, and the hubris that we saw in that press conference. Because Donald Trump, as a gangster, only understands shakedown. He doesn't believe that America wins by negotiations. It's only by threat. And what he's abandoned is America's long history of using their immense diplomatic power to get what they want. What do I mean by that? Well, Canada would have bent over backwards in the past to avoid an open confrontation with the United States. So the language would have been coded, it would have been diplomatic, we would have done a dance, and then in the end, we would compromise. Donald Trump has taken that ability to compromise away from us because he's ridiculed us, he's undermined us, he's laughed at us, he thought he could slap us around. But what did that accomplish, Donald? You see this incredible resistance and determination now from the Canadian people. They hate your guts. And Canadians will never, ever, ever allow you to take anything from us. We would never give up our freedom under any circumstances. Donald Trump, you have made us aware of the necessity to resist. And by his ridiculing of the notion that he went into Venezuela to restore democracy, because obviously Donald Trump doesn't care about democracy, he's pulled out from the Western allies any ability to paper over the problems, to pretend that there's a way we can talk about this. He's made it clear this is just a shakedown. And following the attack in Venezuela, Stephen Miller's wife posted a picture of Greenland with the American flag all over it and said, soon. So he was sending a message to Europe. Guess what? I'm coming for you next. I'm coming for a NATO ally. He's forcing the Europeans as well. They would have bent themselves into pretzels to avoid a confrontation with the United States. Well, now they have no choice. You either stand up or you roll over. That is what the world of gangster politics is all about. What I'm betting on is that this hubris and this arrogance is the beginning of the end. I'm not saying it's coming soon. But America is weaker than it's ever been. It has no allies. It's alienated Africa, which is going much more to the Russians and the Chinese. He's completely angered and alienated Latin America and thinks he can push them around. They are going to be standing up. He's sending a message to China. Well, if we can shake down countries, well, so can you. So, well, there goes our ally in Taiwan. He's sending a message to Putin. Do what you want. But what he's telling the rest of the world is either we stand together at this time or we're going to be broken. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is the moment where it's no longer possible for those sitting on the sidelines, for those in the middle of the road, for those hemming and hawing and hoping for the best, to realize this is anything but a gangster fascist threat. And it's up to us as Canadians to resist. And I know we will. You know, Canada has a long history of defending the international rule of law. Now we're dealing with a regime that openly murders people on the sea and invades countries and kidnaps their leaders. All bets are off. But we know what the mission is and we know what we have to do. And I want to close on this. I want to quote Winston Churchill in 1941 in the darkest moments of the Second World War and what he said about Canada. He said Canada is the linchpin. I'm really struck by that. Canada is the linchpin of the English-speaking world. Canada, whose relations of friendly, affectionate intimacy with the United States on the one hand, and her unswerving fidelity to the Commonwealth on the other, is the link which joins together the great branches of the human family, a link which, spanning the oceans, brings the continents into their true relation and will prevent in future generations any growth of division between the proud and the happy nations of Europe and the great countries which have come into existence in the New World. And here we are as that threat is here to break us apart. Canada remains the linchpin. We remain the front lines. We remain the voice of resistance. This isn't going to be easy, my friends, but I want to assure you, if we keep doing what we're doing, and I urge Prime Minister Carney to start moving on this volunteer force of civilians, we need to build that up. We need to continue to build our alliances. We know now that the Europeans understand that they're going to work with Canada because we are that linchpin that's holding it together, and we will not break. Not now, not ever. is we are true, north, strong, and free, and we'll always be true, north, strong, and free. So thank you so much. Folks, January 16th in Edmonton, we've got some details on that. This is going to be at the Bison Lodge, the Old Times Cabin at the Nellie McClung Park. This is going to be a bit of a different thing because trying to organize two Midas town halls was pretty difficult on such short notice, but we really felt it important to be in Alberta at this time. So in Edmonton, I'm going to be doing it with my colleague, the MP for Edmonton Strathcona, Heather McPherson. So I'll be appearing with her. She is going to be organizing it with her team, and it's going to be her event, but I will be there, and we're inviting the Mighty Midas out to support and to hear the latest in the fight of resistance. January 17th, be in Calgary, still waiting. I mean, we're just getting the last details, but we'll get information to you. So January 16th, Edmonton, Bison Lodge, Nellie McClung Park. January 17th, we'll be in Calgary. We'll get you that.